will save the consumers a lot of money and not have a policy where we are actually having the government go to dairy farmers and say, if you want to get your check, you've got to reduce the size of your herd. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Who claims time in opposition? Gentleman from Minnesota.
Mr. Chair, I claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 10 minutes.
Sure, I'd recognize the gentleman from California, a new member who's actually been in the dairy business and probably the one guy in this place that understands how this works. Mr. Valadeo from California for 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry. This has been a tough one for me because I am the only dairy farmer in this room, and it's been a tough issue because I've lived it for the last 15 years, and I've seen how programs created by this body have hurt dairy farmers. And there's been a lot of programs eliminated in this current farm bill. And that's a good thing. It takes us in a more market-oriented direction. But what I see here is we're continuing that same path in a small way. This margin insurance, by definition, is an insurance when you lose money. You lose money because you're producing a product consumers aren't buying. We have to have a way, if government's going to continue to push money in that direction, we have to make sure they don't continue to produce that product consumers don't want. The argument that people we're going to miss out on an opportunity to export. If there's an export market and they're producing for that, they will sell that product. But you can't have a subsidized product coming into the marketplace and want to grow that export market, again, on a subsidized product because you can't continue to produce that product for that price. If we can't compete, we shouldn't be producing it. If it's going to require that margin insurance to make sure that's produced, it's not a long-term market. It's not a stable market. It's not something we should spend millions of dollars, billions of dollars investing in infrastructure that will not compete. So I think that at the end of the day, that this is probably the best program. We've gotten rid of MILC, we've gotten rid of the price support, we've gotten rid of a lot of programs that continued production when consumers weren't buying that product. And with this one, there's a choice. If they choose to take an opportunity to protect their margins so they can stay afloat, because we have to protect American products and make sure that consumers are buying the safest and the greatest product in the world, which I believe is American dairy product. But you can't have them continue to produce that product in the name of exports or in the name of whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, the consumers pay for it because consumers are taxpayers. If you're going to give them money on the backside out of their back pocket through taxes, you're again paying for that product. The product still has to be paid for. Dairy farmers have to make a profit, but it has to be the right way. And if they're going to get that dollar to continue to produce that product that consumers aren't buying, there has to be somewhere along the line where they cut back and contract on the market. So I rise in opposition. Mr. Goodlatte's been a friend of mine, and I've watched from afar and appreciate everything he's done for the industry over the years, but I strongly rise in opposition to this amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to ask for 1 minute for the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Moran. Virginia, I'm sorry, from Virginia.
For 1 minute.
The chair knows it's the gentleman from Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment. It's a very complicated issue, and I have great respect for our ranking member. But it does seem that we ought to be removing government production limits from our dairy program. Expanding distribution markets throughout the world is one of the best ways to grow American business and create jobs, and that should be one of the roles of government, to remove barriers to expansion and growth. The fact is that the world demand for dairy products is growing at a faster rate than milk production increases in those regions that produce the most milk, like New Zealand and Australia. And it's the U.S. dairy industry that's best positioned to benefit from that growing world demand. But this export growth limitation it's threatened by the Dairy Market Stabilization Program in this bill, because the provision in this bill gives USDA the ability to require every dairy producer enrolled in any level of margin insurance protection to reduce production to meet supply quotas. Can I have another 15 seconds?
You, the gentleman, another 15 seconds.
Yeah. The result of the provision in this bill is that domestic dairy producers would be constrained in their ability to respond to international market opportunities, and that results in lower growth and fewer American jobs. It's this type of supply management plan that's failed in previous farm bills, and they have a dangerous effect of stifling export growth, and so that's why I ask support for the Goodlatte-Scott amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Minnesota.
Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield to one of our ranking members, the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Dairy Security Act in this bill is a result of 4 years of hard work on a bipartisan basis. It's intended to provide strong, market-based safety net that will keep dairy producers afloat while providing stable prices to our consumers. Simply put, the amendment being offered here, the Goodlatte-Scott amendment, is about putting American taxpayers fully paying the bill for down prices that occur in down cycles in the dairy industry. The dairy industry, especially producers, have been victims of these down cycles and the volatility in recent years because the old programs simply don't work and they encourage overproduction. At the same time, producers have been forced to deal with increased feed costs that have increased from $2 a bushel to $7 a bushel, further impacting their bottom line. The Goodlatte-Scott amendment will neither provide a safety net for producers nor prevent the volatility in the market because of unpredictable swings. And, again, it's important to understand reform is in the bill. This amendment would put the taxpayers footing the bill for the insurance program. This amendment will continue to foster the outdated, tired dairy programs that haven't worked. In California, my home state, the nation's leading dairy state in the nation, we've seen over 100 bankruptcies in the last 18 months. The current program isn't good for the dairymen and women, nor is it good for American consumers. The Dairy Security Act not only provides more stability for the producer, but consumer benefits it well, and you should understand this is voluntary. If you want to grow, you can grow. If you don't want to enter the program, you don't have to enter the program. It is voluntary. I strongly urge, as a third-generation dairy family in California, my colleagues to oppose this amendment and to bring our federal dairy policies into the 21st century so dairymen and women can compete and American consumers can have milk prices at reasonable levels. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin, America's dairyland, with more dairy farms than any other in the country. Mr. Ribble, 1 minute.
Thank you, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the gentleman for yielding. I appreciate the comments from Mr. Valadao, my colleague from California, earlier when he said that they didn't have enough consumers to buy their milk. Well, we've got the opposite problem in Wisconsin. People want Wisconsin milk and they want Wisconsin cheese, and that shows the geographical difficulty with this problem and with this the underlying bill. Mr. Goodlatte seeks to correct those geographical differences by taking the most controversial piece of it out. And I stand here in support of doing that. You know, our founders kind of instructed us and said, if you can find agreement in this chamber, do those things. But if you can't find agreement, and we can't find agreement here, don't do those things. And so what Mr. Goodlatte is trying to do is go to the place where we have the most broad agreement, leaving the margin insurance element in place for farmers, but stripping out the supply management element where some regions of the country would be damaged by it. I support the Goodlatte amendment because it's the right type of reform for all of Wisconsin's and all of this country's dairy producers and processors, not one or the other, but both. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Minnesota.
I'm now pleased to recognize the gentleman from Vermont, one of our hard workers on this issue, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
The question facing this Congress is, will we have a farm bill that respects farm families? This is about individual families that are working hard to try to survive, not to get rich. Market stabilization is exactly what Apple Computer does. If they make and sell more iPods, they produce more. If sales go down, they taper off. Why not give that market signal to our farmers with second, third, fourth generation families in Vermont, the Kennett family, the Richardson family, the Rowell family? All they want to do is produce good, nutritious milk for the people in their community. This market stabilization gets them out of the death spiral, where they have absolutely no control over what that price is. And when it plunges, the only opportunity they have to try to survive is to increase production. The price goes down again. This market stabilization is using the market. It's an ally of the farmer, as it should be. So this makes sense. And what I am so proud of is that America's farmers, from Vermont to California, worked together to come up for something that would help pass that farm on to the next generation, and it saves money for the taxpayers. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, let me just correct one thing. The Goodlatte-Scott amendment has a very robust safety net program in it. As a matter of fact, it's the same safety net program that is in the bill itself. Let me make one other point right quick, Mr. Chairman. With the recent study by Professor Scott Brown from the University of Missouri, put in a study that showed if this plan in this bill, this management supply bill, goes into effect, in the first month alone, school lunch program costs will go up $14 million. And the price of a gallon of milk will go up 32 cents. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Barbara Lee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of this bipartisan amendment, which I am proud to co-sponsor. The underlying farm bill is designed to artificially raise the price of milk. This will have negative consequences for consumers, and that's why the Consumer Federation of America, the National Consumers League, the Consumers Union, and other consumer groups, also the Teamsters, oppose the underlying language in this bill and support this amendment. And when milk prices increase, it disproportionately harms America's poor working families. Now, there's a lot in this bill that I cannot support, including the heartless cuts to SNAP. Without this amendment, this bill adds insult to injury. Without this amendment, 246,000 women and children will lose access to milk because of the decrease of milk supply and also prices, as the representative from Georgia has so eloquently laid out. The milk prices will rise about 32 cents. So this amendment protects families whose budgets are already stretched to the limit, and they're being already cut in this bill. So I hope that people understand this bill. There's been a lot of confusion, but this is a good bill that consumers support, the Teamsters support, and I urge an aye vote on the amendment, not the bill, but the amendment.
Gentleman from Minnesota.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take 30 seconds right now, then I'm going to reserve because I'm ahead. But I just need to stand up and say that this is not true. Scott Brown put out a study on this bill, and they said the effect of this is going to be a half a cent a gallon, maybe a couple cents a gallon. So where they're coming up with this 30 cents or 50 cents, I have no idea. This is a complete fabrication that's made up out of something that I don't know where it comes from. So people need to understand that. If Scott Brown is probably the most respected economist in dairy in the country, and he did not say it was 30 cents or 50 cents. And I reserve.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Speaker, what Mr. Brown said was up to 32 cents a gallon. At this time, I am happy to yield to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Huelskamp, 1 minute.
Gentleman recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to visit on this. I do believe in an individual's right to earn a living, to start a business, to earn a profit, to grow that business, and to expand to meet new market opportunities without government interference. And I also believe that should be specifically available to dairy farmers as well. But in the dairy program before us today, that flies in the face of this right. Government should not have the power to tell dairy farmers that they won't be paid for the milk they produce. I think it's completely hypocritical for members of this body to come to the floor and rail against market manipulation by big business, then turn around and say Washington should do the same thing. We should support the Goodlatte-Scott Amendment. We should oppose government control and interference in the marketplace, and we should support dairy freedom, growth, and opportunity. There are numerous dairy families across this country, but one in particular in my district, the McCarty family. Please let them have the opportunity to grow their business. Give them that chance. If we adopt the language as is, it will restrict their ability to grow their business. I yield back.
Gentleman from Minnesota. Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Georgia.
Yes, Senator. I would like now to recognize the distinguished lady from Colorado, Ms. DeJette, for 1 minute.
Gentlewoman's recognized for 1 minute.
Ready in this bill to impact low-income families' access to food. The U.S. government purchases 20% of domestic milk production for use in anti-hunger programs. So if the price of milk goes up, so does the cost of our nutrition programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Program, Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, or the WIC program, and the National School Lunch Program. Everybody admits that the effect of the underlying language in the bill will be to raise milk prices. And this is a burden that our low-income families simply cannot afford. We need a balance. We need a balance that will give a safety net to our dairy families, but won't take it off of the backs of our low-income folks. So I would urge a yes vote on this amendment, just like the Consumer Federation of America and so many other groups that Ms. Lee talked about. This is a good thing for consumers, it's a good thing for Americans, and we should have that balance. Vote yes, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Minnesota.
I'm now pleased to yield the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Delbeni, 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I rise in strong opposition to the Goodlatte-Scott amendment, which would create unnecessary market volatility and uncertainty for our farmers. The Dairy Security Act creates a new voluntary insurance program and will help consumers by eliminating the price spikes that are common today, ensuring stable milk prices. There has been a great deal of misinformation about how the Dairy Security Act would affect consumers, but researchers like Dr. Brown of University of Missouri estimate milk prices would only rise between 1/2 of 1 cent to a few cents per gallon. The current volatility in the market is far more harmful to consumers than that very slight increase. Simply put, it is poor policy to commit funds to a dairy program without fixing the underlying problem of oversupply, which is what this amendment would do. An insurance-only model poorly addresses the symptom of low margins and completely misses the issues of supply and demand. The stabilization program also has safeguards that will protect the U.S. export market, which is critical for dairy producers. In my district, I've had long conversations with local dairy farmers, been to their farms, and the sentiment is unanimous. Dairy farmers oppose this amendment because it will hurt them and consumers, and I urge my colleagues to follow their advice and vote no. I yield back.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Speaker, at this time it's my pleasure to yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Grimm, 1 minute.
Gentleman recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. Today I rise in strong support of the Goodlatte-Scott amendment. The Farm Bill, as is, artificially increases the price of milk and cheese. And where I come from, this will devastate my local delis, my specialty food stores, restaurants throughout Staten Island, Brooklyn, and throughout our nation. As for oversupply, today New York is America's yogurt capital. That industry accounts for almost $1 billion with a B in economic growth, revenue, and 15,000 jobs. Yet while we repeatedly talk about jobs, entrepreneurship, Chobani Yogurt exemplifies this as a true American success story. Started in 2005, Chobani transformed a groundbreaking new industry of Greek yogurt in America. But without an adequate milk supply at reasonable prices, Chobani, local delis, other companies will have a limited ability to grow and keep their products reasonably priced. For this reason, I urge my colleagues to support the Goodlatte Amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Minnesota.
I'm now pleased to yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Owens, one of our good champions of the dairy industry.
How much time does the gentleman yield?
1 minute.
Gentleman recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank Mr. Grimm for mentioning the yogurt industry. That is very prominent in my district, and we supply milk to many of the yogurt plants. There is no question that this bill would negatively impact, Mr. Goodlatte's amendment would negatively impact that, whereas the Dairy Security Act would have a positive impact on our ability to supply milk to a growing industry that does in fact create jobs. I rise in support of the Dairy Security Act and oppose to this amendment because it represents 4 years of bipartisan compromise worked out between Mr. Lucas and Mr. Peterson, and those are the kinds of activities we should be doing in this Congress. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
I now recognize the distinguished lady from Florida, Ms. Corrine Brown, for 1 moment.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the members of the House, let me be clear. I will not be voting for this bill. I will vote for no bill that cuts $20.5 billion from the SNAP program, but I will be voting for this amendment. This amendment, we had a hideous bill on the floor a couple of days ago, and I want to be clear, I support all children, and it does not end in birth. It is ludicrous that we're here, the goody-goody two-shoes are now cutting SNAP program and an attack on children. The families of 3 can earn no more than $24,000 per year in income. 76% of the SNAP household include a child, an elderly person, or a disabled person. Because of this insensitivity of this Congress, there was an announcement in my paper that Meals on Wheels for seniors are being cut. I am fighting for babies who need milk, families that cannot afford food for their children. Support this amendment and vote against this bad bill.
Chair will inform the members the gentleman from Minnesota has 2.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Virginia has 1 minute remaining, and the gentleman from Georgia's time has expired. Gentleman from Minnesota.
Chairman, I would yield to my colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Walz, for 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dairy farming is risky business. You've heard that from them themselves. These are the folks that are up at 4 a.m., rain, shine, snow, sleet, doesn't matter. 7 days a week, 365 days a year, milking cows, doing again 12 hours later. They don't get rich off this. They don't get sick time. They don't get paid holidays. They get no time off if you want to get to it. The one thing we could provide them is certainty and take the volatility out of the market to make sure that when they have a bad year, we don't end up liquidating these, consolidating into large dairies, and harming the very people that the people who support this amendment claim to support. I ask my colleagues to reject this amendment, do the right thing for these hardworking Americans.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Speaker, at this time I am pleased to recognize the gentleman from Ohio, a member of the Agriculture Committee, to close our debate for 1 minute.
Gentleman recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment. This amendment builds on the reforms of the underlying bill and scraps the proposed supply management program. Doing so will allow farmers and dairy producers to expand and meet the growing global demand of American dairy products. It will grow our exports and grow our economy. It also will protect families and farmers. Families are already having enough trouble making ends meet. This amendment will help bring down prices for our constituents by providing more opportunity and fairness to dairy farmers across the country. It also will save taxpayers dollars. This amendment saves taxpayers another $15 million on top of the savings in the underlying bill. Every penny counts. This amendment will create a better and more market-driven policies for our farmers. Supply management is not the way to go. I support the Goodlatte-Scott amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Minnesota has 2 minutes remaining.
Chairman, I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman's recognized.
As has been said, we've been working on this for 4 years. Clearly, the current policy doesn't work because we got all this volatility. If you adopt this Goodlatte-Scott amendment, you're going to continue to have that volatility. Now, those people that are concerned about the price of milk, you know, when we had high prices, the processors raised the prices. When the prices collapsed to $11, they didn't cut the prices. I've sent out charts to you to explain that. So what people need to understand is what we're trying to do here is give farmers a way to protect themselves against the feed costs and this volatility. Now, this program is voluntary. Nobody has to get into this program. If they don't like the stabilization fund, they don't have to take the insurance. They don't have to be involved in it. But what we're saying is if you're going to have the government subsidize your insurance, which is what we're doing, then you're going to have to be responsible if this thing gets out of whack. And what the Goodlatte-Scott amendment does is it puts that responsibility on the taxpayers, not on the farmers, which is, you know, irresponsible in my opinion. So, and the other thing you need to understand is this, you know, in regular crop insurance, the price is, you can only insure the price for that year. But in this bill, in the Goodlatte-Scott bill, you insure the price not based on what the market is, it's based on the feed cost plus the margin. So you're going to insure milk for like $18 a hundredweight, but if the price goes to $11, the farmer still can have $18 insurance. He doesn't care if it's $11. The government's going to pay for that, not him. I mean, this is a crazy thing that we're talking about doing here. And, you know, we're putting the responsibility on the taxpayer. We're actually probably going to raise costs to consumers. It's the wrong way to go, and I urge my colleagues to oppose the Goodlatte-Scott amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time pursuant to Clause 6 of is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Virginia.
On that, ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentleman requests a recorded vote.
I do.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed.
Submit remarks on the amendment to the record.
Under general leave.
Thank you.
It is now in order to consider amendment number 100, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, amendment number 100, printed in House Report number 113-117, offered by Mr. Fortenberry of Nebraska.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first I would like to begin by recognizing the hard work that Chairman Lucas has put in on this bill, as well as the ranking member, Mr. Peterson. A complex bill such as this requires time, dedication, and a willingness to work with members from a very diverse range of agricultural communities across this nation, and I appreciate the effort. I also recognize that many were here very late last night, and there's a certain urgency to our deliberations. But I believe it is critically important that we also have a meaningful discussion and a debate on the issue of payment limits. The other legislative body has seen fit to include language in this amendment in its version of the Farm Bill, and this amendment gives us the opportunity to send a message that some reform in this area is necessary. While there is much to commend in this Farm Bill, Mr. Chairman, I am concerned that it falls short of successfully reforming the payment limit system. Without a doubt, agricultural payments are lopsided. Based on the USDA's annual Agricultural Resource Management Survey, the largest 12% of farms in terms of gross receipts received more than 62% of all government payments in 2009. Such a skewed system, Mr. Chairman, is simply not sustainable in the long run. It leads to the escalation of land prices and accelerates the concentration of land and resources into fewer hands. This is not healthy for rural America. Continuation of the current system will only lead to greater concentration in agriculture and fewer opportunities for younger and beginning farmers. We need a thoughtful and balanced approach here, one that encourages young people to take a chance and gives them some support when they need it, one that doesn't lend itself to the trend of fewer and fewer farms. Mr. Chairman, we pride ourselves that agriculture is the main bright spot in America's economy. And how did we get here? By ensuring that we have a vibrant marketplace which depends upon large numbers of producers actively engaged in stewardship of the land. The amendment I am offering will help farms supports reach their intended recipients as well and close loopholes that benefit investors not actively engaged in farming. It levels the playing field for farm families facing competition from larger operations that do collect the lion's share of government payments. The amendment reduces farm payment limits, capping commodity payments at $250,000 for any one farm. That's a lot of subsidy. The legislation will also close loopholes in the current law to ensure payments reach their intended recipient, that is, working farmers. The savings from reforms established in this legislation help ensure that the farm payment system is also set on a more fiscally sustainable trajectory. It's fair to farmers, fair to the taxpayer, fair to America, because it incorporates good governing principles. This amendment has wide support from a diverse range of agricultural groups such as the National Farmers Union, Center for Rural Affairs, National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition, to Heritage Action, and Citizens Against Government Waste. They recognize the opportunity we have for meaningful reform here. Now, it is important, Mr. Chairman, to emphasize that this does not address crop insurance subsidies. That is a completely separate matter, and I recognize the need to differentiate between a program which producers must contribute their own dollars toward the actuarial success of the program to one that is directly coming from the government. Mr. Chairman, I've been through 2 farm bills now, and I've talked to hundreds of farmers in rural America. What they're looking for is simply a chance to compete and compete well, not a guarantee of unlimited money from the government. We owe it to our hardworking farmers to sustain that fair and robust marketplace. With that, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Who claims time? Gentleman from
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman claim
Yes,
time
sir.
in opposition. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. And I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand in strong opposition to this amendment. One particular troubling issue is the redefinition of active engaged farming. My good colleagues should know that this will alter fundamentally the normal operations on a farm. Take 2 quick examples, a brother and a sister. The sister runs the tractors, plants the crops, harvests the crops. The brother, on the other hand, does all the bookkeeping, files tax returns, works with FSA, arranges the loans at the bank. That he would no longer be considered actively engaged in farming. And that makes no sense whatsoever. The broader spread one, though, is the generational shift in farming operations. As parents age, grandparents age, they take less of a physical role in farming operations and hand that off to the younger generations, the folks that my good colleague was speaking to. This redefinition would say that as they age out and quit doing the actual physical labor, and yet their wisdom and knowledge and vast experience is added to the success of those farming operations, they would no longer be considered actively engaged in farming and would be excluded from the programs itself. This is wrong-headed. It adds additional regulatory burdens on family farms across this country in an unnecessary manner and doesn't get to what my good colleague is trying to get to. I would strongly urge my colleagues to reject this amendment and vote no on the Fortenberry amendment. Now yield back.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Nebraska.
Can I inquire, Mr. Chairman, as to how much time I have?
Gentleman has 1 minute remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not out to punish anyone's success. In fact, I celebrate it. $250,000 subsidy is a lot of money to come directly from the government. I think many Americans would agree. We put caps and limits on virtually every other program, so why not this one? What I am saying is that amount of money should be sufficient. I would like to offer another example regarding direct engagement in farming that helps clarify the issue that my colleague just raised. A farm in the Deep South recently received $440,000, again from none of it to someone actually working the farm, but to 6 general partners and 5 spouses, all of whom claim to be providing the management needed to running the farm. What this bill does, in addition to capping payments, it provides a more enforceable working definition for those actively engaged in farm management, and that's an important reform as well. Again, this has been worked out in the other legislative body from producers or from members who represent diverse agricultural districts all over this country, and I think this is a reasonable reform that, again, is fair to the taxpayer, fair to the farm family, and consistent with good governing principles. It's a balanced, reasonable approach. I reserve.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the subcommittee chairman of the Ag Committee from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford, 1.5 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I respectfully oppose the gentleman's amendment. In order for farmers in my district to compete, their operations must be economies of scale. This is largely due to the high cost of production, expensive machinery, and razor-thin margins. In order to remain economically viable, a Mid-South farmer must produce a high quantity of crops and then sell that crop at an adequate price, which doesn't always work out so well. Some years an Arkansas farmer might do very well if conditions are right and the prices don't drop too low, but in other years, times can be absolutely brutal. This amendment takes the wrong approach because it adds even more uncertainty to the farmer's operation. Most farmers go to the bank for loans to pay production costs and purchase of new technology and machinery. Once you introduce a restrictive AGI, it becomes much more difficult to obtain the financing necessary to sustain an operation and stay in business. Through a careful approach, the Ag Committee has already brought significant reforms to AGI eligibility, which has already been difficult on some of my producers. We certainly don't need to go a step further. Additionally, requiring an on-farm labor, active on-farm labor is counterproductive for 2 reasons. One, it discourages farms from improving and becoming more efficient, and 2, it discourages the participation of young farmers, and that could mean that they're out of a job. Farm owners and operators need to focus their attention on the management of overall farm and key management decisions. I strongly urge defeat of this amendment with all due respect, and with that I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, 1 minute.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentleman for the time. I rise in opposition to the amendment. Farming in 2013 can be a very complicated, high-tech and high-risk business. For example, there are many farmers in my district who farm thousands of acres that they don't own. They might grow cotton, peanuts, grains, and specialty crops. They need a whole fleet of different equipment for each one of these crops. They're probably irrigating a whole lot of their crops. They likely employ dozens of people. These might be multi-million-dollar enterprises, and yet they still fit in the definition of a family farm. For these kinds of crops, it simply takes that kind of scale to be sustainable. And many farmers simply cannot afford to farm on that scale unless they have a safety net that can cover their risk. This bill includes sustainable reforms of our farm safety net to make sure it's available to the people who need it most. It's not fair, nor in our best interest, to limit the participation of these larger family farms by undercutting their safety net, as this amendment would do. We need these farmers, and they need us. I therefore urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment and yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, might I inquire how much time I have left?
Gentleman has 1 1/4 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield a 1 1/4 minutes to the ranking member of the House Ag Committee, Mr. Peterson.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 1/4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, and Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to this amendment. And, you know, if you like the Department of Labor's overreach on child labor, you know, when they prevented 4-H kids from helping mom and dad on the farm, you're going to love this amendment. Because what this amendment does is it puts bureaucrats in charge of deciding who's a farmer and who isn't. And when we put this AGI test on, they developed 430 pages of regulations to try to figure out how to implement that. And if this amendment passes, I would be hard-pressed to figure out how many pages of regulations they're going to come up with to try to figure out whether you're actually a farmer or not. You know, what we're changing this actively engaged definition, which we've been struggling with for years, and which I think we did a pretty good job with in 2008, putting in new requirements, new tests, something that we really don't even understand how it's going to work. And I think it's just going to totally screw up the safety net, especially for our friends in the South that have a different situation than we do up in my part of the world. So this is an overreach. It's getting into areas that we've never done before with payment limitations at a time when we're changing these programs and we don't really even understand how this would work other than to know it's going to really screw things up. So I would strongly urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The amendment offered by the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Nebraska.
Ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Nebraska will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 101, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise speak on this amendment.
Gentlemen have an amendment at the desk?
Yes, I do.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment Number 101, printed in House Report Number 113-117, offered by Mr. Huelskamp of Kansas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271, the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Huelskamp, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield as much time as I might consume, and thank you. I rise today along with several of my colleagues to offer what we believe should be the first step in serious reform of the SNAP program, also known as food stamps. It has been said we should judge the success of government programs not by the number of people receiving the benefits, but by the number of people who no longer need them. As a result of the bipartisan work reforms in the TANF program in 1996, after that period, we saw a 57% reduction in the number of people on TANF. This amendment would take the most successful welfare reform in the history of this country, signed into law by President Bill Clinton and passed by a Republican Congress, and applies it to now the largest means-tested assistance program we have. And that's what that amendment would do. In addition to that, applying that successful work requirement, we would have additional reforms in terms of LIHEAP and a few other items that would provide additional savings in the food stamp program. And with that, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I am opposed to the amendment.
Gentleman claim time in opposition?
Yes, Mr.
Gentleman is
Chairman.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield to the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I speak in opposition to this amendment. This is really a very poorly conceived amendment that would require all non-disabled individuals to participate in job search every month or immediately lose benefits, even if the individual is already working or even if the individual is a child, a minor. This amendment would increase the SNAP cuts by 50% to $31 billion instead of the $21.5 billion. It would immediately subject 2 million jobless, childless adults to harsh benefit cuts. It would slash benefits for 2 million people, about $90 a month. It would eliminate all the SNAP, employment and training funds, eliminate nutrition education, impose new job search requirements on all people, even if they're working. And it would send people into a deep depression. I think that this is an amendment that we should oppose, and I would yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to yield 1 minute to a member of the Ag Committee, Mr. Neugebauer.
Gentleman from Texas recognized for 1 minute.
And I thank the gentleman. And what this amendment, I rise in strong support of it. In fact, part of the language of a bill that I had introduced is incorporated in this bill, and I appreciate the gentleman for including that. What is this amendment about? It's about making sure that people that are on these programs qualify for them, that they're not automatically put on them because they're on some other program. It's also about reducing duplicative programs in the government, such as nutrition education and job training. We have job training and other programs. But more importantly, what the American people understand is that our entitlement programs are growing at an unsustainable rate, and so we need to make sure that people that are on food stamps are actively looking for work. I don't think anybody argues with that. The second thing is making sure that people that are on this program are the people that need it, and secondly, that qualify for it. So this is a common sense amendment, and the American taxpayers deserve this kind of accountability. Anything less is unacceptable. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I now yield to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, 1 minute.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. This is yet another heartless cut on the backs of hungry families all across America. How much is enough for those who are relentless in attacking low-income families and hungry children? Cutting over $20 billion in SNAP benefits is bad enough, but this amendment would add insult to injury. This is mind-boggling. Let me tell you, I know from personal experience, no one wants to be on food stamps. Many who are on SNAP are hard-working people making minimum wage, and others are desperately looking for a job in these difficult economic times. This amendment demands that hungry families search for a job, even while it eliminates all employment assistance and job training funds for those very families. Let's not pretend that by making a family suffer more hunger and more desperation and more hardship that a job will suddenly appear for them. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on this very, very heartless, cruel, and inhumane amendment. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Kansas. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman from Minnesota, 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment. You know, we have worked this out between the chairman and myself, and this is breaking the deal that we had, and I would say a vote for this amendment is a vote against the Farm Bill, so oppose it.
From Kansas.
May I inquire the balance of my time?
The gentleman from Kansas has 3 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Oklahoma has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate waiting on a few other folks to speak, but one thing I would like to point out, I appreciate the arguments of my colleague from Texas that indicates these are common sense reforms. And I think most Americans agree, let's help folks that are in need but we probably shouldn't help those who don't actually qualify for food stamps. With the adoption of this amendment, it will require folks that would like to receive food stamps, SNAP benefits, would actually have to qualify for them instead of being qualified through another program. It was also noted about the impact of these reforms and their potential impact on cuts. Let's look at a little history of this particular program. In 2002, in the 2002 Farm Bill, $270 billion was the spending level. $270 billion. In the 2008 Farm Bill, it was approximately $400 billion. If this amendment is adopted, the spending level would be $733 billion. Only in Washington could you say going from $270 billion to $733 billion is a cut. These are common sense reforms. These, a few decades ago, were considered bipartisan reforms to encourage people to look for work, to encourage people to get a job. I agree with my colleagues. There isn't a person in America, I don't think, that wouldn't rather have a paycheck rather than a SNAP check or a SNAP card or a Vision card if you're the state of Kansas. These are very common sense reforms. They will work. They're good for Americans, they're good for our taxpayers, and they're good for the people receiving benefits. We have 47 million Americans receiving food stamps today. Please, let's ask them, require them to actually go out and look for a job. They might actually find them. I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman reserve the balance of his time. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Might I inquire, does the gentleman from Kansas have the right to close?
From Oklahoma has the right to close.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Kansas.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself what time I may have remaining.
Gentleman has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, the process of crafting this Farm Bill has entailed much effort by the committee. We've looked at everything within our jurisdictions. We've come up with ways of saving money and reforming things and making things more efficient across the board in every title. Let me touch for just a moment on the nutrition title. The committee agreed to $20.5 billion in savings, ending categorical eligibility, compelling states to the tune of $8 billion worth of savings to make adjustments in how they address LIHEAP. We have gone a tremendous distance in a bipartisan way to achieve the first real reform since 1996. Now, I appreciate my colleagues' efforts to try and increase those savings. But I say to you, the number in the bill is workable. It is something that we can achieve. It is something that I believe, and we don't all necessarily see eye to eye on this, I believe that will still allow those folks who are qualified under federal law to receive the help they need, they deserve. Please turn this amendment back. Please move forward with the reforms we have. Let's do things that we've not been able to do since 1996. Let's not go so far that nothing is the end result. Defeat the amendment, support the bill, let us move forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time back.
Question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Kansas. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentleman ask for a recorded vote. Does the gentleman ask for
Yes.
a recorded vote? Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Kansas will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 102, printed in Part B of House Report 113-117. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to speak on behalf of my amendment.
Gentlemen have an amendment at the desk?
Yes, sir.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Part B, Amendment Number 102, printed in House Report Number 113-117, offered by Mr. Sutherland of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 271, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Sutherland, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The numbers don't lie. America's welfare system is broken. Food stamp benefits have tripled in the past decade. There are more Americans living in poverty today than when the war on poverty was launched a half-century ago. Instead of incentivizing work, we are reinforcing the same government dependency and cyclical poverty that we all wish to eliminate. It is clear that an important variable has been missing from America's anti-poverty equation, and that is the element of work. History has proven that work is the surest way to empower able-bodied Americans to advance from welfare to self-sufficiency. When a Republican-controlled Congress and a Democrat president joined together to pass welfare reform requiring work, the results were dramatic. Nationwide, welfare rolls dropped by 67%. In my home state of Florida, the number was higher, approximately 85%. Work participation by never-married single moms and household earnings skyrocketed. Child poverty rates plummeted. This true bipartisan success story is what my amendment is based upon. Our amendment empowers the states to require work for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, benefits. We apply the same sensible work preparation, job training, and community service activities that are at the heart of welfare reform. Our plan is endorsed by several states' human services secretaries who approached us because they understand how important work can be for individuals truly in need. The simple fact, Mr. Chairman, is that work works. We must have a system in place that provides a helping hand to the most vulnerable among us. By requiring work for able-bodied SNAP recipients, we can ensure that the resources get to those in need more effectively and efficiently. I encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting my amendment and renewing the God-given opportunity for earned success in America. Mr. Chairman, with that, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from Wisconsin.
Yes, I'd like to claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Despite what we have heard from the author of this program, there's no work in this bill. This amendment would more appropriately be called the state bonuses for terminating SNAP benefits for people who want to work but can't find a job because they're in a recession, and ends benefits for children, disabled people, yes, and even disabled veterans. I think the most egregious thing about this amendment is that there's no funding for work or training programs in this bill at all, even though we're ordering people to do it. And there is a perverse incentive for states to end SNAP benefits for people because suddenly food stamps or SNAP benefits become fungible. We just rejected an amendment in our last series of votes that would have allowed people to get toothpaste and toothbrushes with SNAP benefits. But what this amendment does, it allows the state to pocket these sanctions and use it for whatever they want to balance the budget with it, to convert SNAP benefits into tax breaks for corporations or for wealthy people. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Majority Leader Cantor, who represents a state that, as a result of the 1996 work requirement, welfare rolls were reduced by over 84%.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
I thank the Chairman, and I thank the gentleman from Florida. Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of this amendment. In 1996, the Congress came together in a bipartisan way to change the incentive structure in our basic cash welfare program that helps needy families. The results were nothing but a success. Within 5 years, welfare caseloads fell by more than 60%, and the economic prospects of many former welfare families were substantially improved. America saw increased earnings by low-income families and significant reductions in child poverty. The incentives were right. And even in the depths of the worst economic turmoil of a few years ago, the reforms were succeeding at moving families from dependency into work. Those changes made in welfare reform resulted from a foundation laid before 1996, where states experimented with different approaches to determine which ones were the most effective at increasing workforce participation and boosting earnings. Prior to enactment of welfare reform, states had been given waivers of the old law to become laboratories of innovation. The amendment by Mr. Sutherland before us today builds on that successful approach and will give states the opportunity to test whether the same successful strategies that were used in cash welfare programs in the 1990s will help food stamp recipients gain and retain employment and boost their earnings today. Mr. Sutherland's amendment provides for a pilot program which will allow states, if they choose, to apply the TANF work requirements to their able-bodied working-age adult food stamp caseload. States have come forward asking us for the ability to enter into these demonstration pilots. But unless we adopt the gentleman's amendment, these states won't be able to launch these demonstration projects. This amendment is well-crafted and takes into consideration the availability of child care for mothers with young children and hardship situations like families facing domestic violence. The Sutherland Amendment also tells states that if they are successful at increasing work participation and families' earnings among the food stamp caseload, they will share in the savings that would otherwise end up in the hands of the federal government. If enacted, this amendment will help reduce federal expenditures, provide assistance to the states, and most importantly, it will help struggling families who find themselves relying on public assistance to get back on their feet. Right now, many American families are struggling, and the SNAP program is in place to help these families who find themselves in dire economic circumstances. While this program is an important part of our safety net, our overriding goal should be to help our citizens with the education and skills they need to get back on their feet so that they can provide for themselves and their families. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Sutherland, for this hard work on this issue, and I urge my colleagues to support his amendment. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Wisconsin.
I'd like to inquire about how much time I have remaining.
Gentlelady has 3.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Florida has 1.5 minutes remaining. Gentlelady from Florida, or from Wisconsin.
Thank you. Just because we keep saying that the 1996 welfare program was successful, don't make it so. Poverty has increased among women and children. 1/4 of all children in this country are poor. So with that, I would yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
It's recognized for 2 minutes.
I rise in strong opposition to this amendment, which the effect would be to increase hunger and hardship across America. We have experienced the most devastating recession since the Great Depression. Unemployment is at 7.5%. 1 in 7 people today are availing themselves of food stamps because they have to. People are struggling in our economy today. They want to work. They cannot find a job. Everyone is experiencing that in their own communities. This amendment would allow an unlimited number of states to require adults who receive or even apply for food stamps to be working or in job training, or else they lose their food stamp benefits. Why would a state want to do this? Because the amendment also allows states to keep part of the savings from cutting people off of the program, use the money for whatever purpose the state officials want, instead of feeding people with those dollars. States can cut taxes for companies or even maybe support special interest subsidies. And included, as my colleague said, there is no funding in this bill for the creation of jobs, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle refuse to deal with the issue of job creation, and there is no worker training money in this bill. And so there is no funding to do what they would like to do. Let's take the crop insurance program, my friends. We just voted on an amendment that voted down reforming that program. We have 26 individuals in this nation. We can't find out who they are. They get at least $1 million in a subsidy. $1 million in a subsidy. Do you think they're eating well? 3 squares or better a day. And you know what? They have no income threshold, no asset test, no cap. They don't even have to farm the land, and they don't have to follow conservation practices. You want to go and find out where we can save money here? Let's find out who these 26 people are, or those people who are on the crop insurance program, and let's make sure that they are working. Otherwise, we will cut their benefits. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this unbelievably misguided amendment.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr.